All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. We are the Product Success Team. I am Rodney.
And I am Lex.
And in previous trainings, we've covered peripheral devices and specific application features. We're now going to take a different approach and present a different focus. Today, we will be going over the integrated payment settings in the cloud back office. Now, if you have any questions, please keep your questions related to the topic at hand. Please keep yourselves muted during the presentation. However, if you do have an immediate question, you can ask your questions in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat as always. Otherwise, you can ask your questions verbally. When we open the floor for questioning, just make sure to unmute yourselves at that time. All right, so to navigate to the integrated payments from the Express office, go to Settings, Store Config, Financial Config. And on the image you see on the right, you'll see the tab there. And we will be focusing on the Integrated Payments tab. The Integrated Payments tab is divided into three sections: Integrated Payment Options, Format Options, and Print Options. Now, this tab primarily manages the information and actions after completing transactions. Information like what will print on the payment receipt and actions such as enabling or disabling on-screen capture or on-screen signature and tips, and even setting up auto settlement. There are more settings, and we will cover them in more detail in the following slides. Right. Now, when expanding the integrated payment options section, you will see some settings that are grayed out. These settings are specific to the merchant setup and processor. These settings cannot be changed by the end user. And as I mentioned earlier, you will be able to define a settlement device by device number and what time the settlements will trigger. This device will need to be running Aldelo Express during that trigger time. It is best practice to disable any screen timeout. Now, when it comes to the customer facing on-screen settings, you can enable either or both the tip suggestion and or customer signature. If enabled, you can customize when tips will prompt, that is before or after the transaction, and how the custom no tips actions reflect, whether the custom tip will replace a no tip option or if the no tip option will be disabled altogether. You can also customize which services such as dine-in, takeout, or any other available service will have the on-screen settings enabled or disabled. And you can determine whether the order closes once payment has been received. And you can also determine the status of the transaction post-payment, that is, whether or not the transaction stays open as a pre-auth and still can accept tips, or the transactions will automatically capture. But in this scenario, you cannot add tips post-transaction. And lastly, you can allow for tips to be added to non-integrated payments, such as Uber Eats, Grubhub, etc. Now, expanding the format options, you can customize information that will print on the payment receipt, information such as order time, order number, and ticket number. You can disable the customer signature on payment receipts by defining a signature waiver maximum total. Here you can define a maximum amount where the customer signature is waived. So for example, if we set a maximum total to $25, the customer line will not print on a payment receipt for any order under $25. This can be defined per card brand. If the on-screen tip suggestion is disabled, more format options will be available. The print suggested tips options will be available for all available services. And lastly are the print options. When expanded, you can set the number of copies of receipts from 1 to 2 copies. Then you can set up the auto print options per service. When this is enabled, the payment receipt will automatically print upon authorization. The customer will still have options to print, email, or text the receipt. If this is disabled, the aforementioned options will still be available, but the payment receipt will not print automatically. All right, so with that, do we have any questions at this time?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay, does anyone want to express their questions verbally? All right, so let's go ahead and proceed here. I'll hand it over to Lex for a demonstration.
Okay. All right, as you can see, we're going to start off in the back office here. We're going to go to settings. We're going to go to store config, financial config. And then on the top, we're going to click on integrated payments. The integrated payments, you might have different options depending on what has been requested to the store. For example, we have integrated credit card tokenization enabled on this account here. Last week, we talked about queue charges. The integrated credit card supports tokenization does need to be enabled for that to be to work. If you want to add auto batch, you can enable it by adding a device number to the integrated payments auto batch trigger device and adding time when the batch will trigger. This will make sure that one of the devices is selected to auto batch every day at a designated time. Make sure that whichever device is chosen to have power connected to it, and also the auto lock feature on the iPad to be disabled. The store I'm displaying has a cash discount enabled as well. So if you do not have cash discount program, this feature will not show up in this area here. And the cash discount program looks like this. It looks like this here. As you can see, there's a total for the credit card amount, and there's a cash total as well. And on the iPad, it looks like this. So there's a balance total for the credit card if they choose to select credit card, and also a cash balance as well. By default, the customer-facing screen tip suggestion and entry customer-facing screen signature capture are disabled. If you enable these, Aldelo Express will unlock new features, including we have the prompt for tip before credit card or debit sale transactions. There's also prompt for tip before gift transactions. We have replace on-screen tip suggestions, custom tip button with no tip button instead, and also hide no tip button. So let me turn that off. As you can see, it enables a bunch of new features here. Now, if you do enable the top feature, you want to also make sure that you enable the screen signature capture as well. And on the receipt, it looks like this here. On the left, we have the on-screen tip suggestion entry and the customer-facing on-screen signature disabled. We enabled it on the right side. So you can see the difference between the two. So the first one on the left has a tip line and the total on the left, and also signature on the bottom. On the right, we have that filled out here. Right, so if you enable the prompt tip before credit card or debit sale transaction and the gift transaction, it'll look like this here. Here is the gift card and the credit card option. The tip prompt will pop up first before the sale of the credit card or gift card transactions. If you enable the front-facing signature capture on the bottom, it will look like this here. So as you can see, this was approved. You have the tip entry. There's also a custom and no tip option in the signature line here. You can also remove the custom tip button with the no tip instead. So if I enable this here, it will look like this. Will look like this here with the custom button instead. We also have disabled tip screen on dine-in order or for bars. So for example, you don't, for example, you have customers that's still sitting at the location, you're handing them the credit card check so they don't have to come into the front to sign the iPad. You can go ahead and say yes here. Also for delivery as well, you probably want to go ahead and say yes there as well. And sometimes for drive-through as well. So that is an option. You can turn those on or to disable the signature cap showing up on the screen. The manual close check required for order settles with integrated payments. This allows you to leave the order open. So if you're running a transaction, it'll go to the screen here. Give me a second. As you can see, the transactions went through. However, it did not close out the check. I can enter in a tip amount here by swiping from right to left. I can void out, do a reprint on the guest check or the actual receipt. I can adjust the tip. And then from here, I can manually close out the check. And then the auto capture pre-auth transaction upon close check. This allows the transactions to close out the check. However, it does disable you from re-entering in a new tip amount or even voiding out the transaction. Now, there are a couple advantages here. There's no pre-auth. It completes the transaction. So basically, technically, you don't even need to close out the cash register if you enable this. However, like I said earlier, you're unable to adjust tips or void out the transactions. You will need to perform a refund for that. The non-integrated payments allows tips. These are for Uber Eats, Grubhub, basically all non-integrated payments, including like checks. You are allowed to add tips to those transactions if this is set to yes. Then we do have a couple more in here. We do have the format options. As you can see, it says do not print time on payment receipt. If you say yes there, the print option will disappear from the receipt. Also, the order number and the ticket number will disappear from the receipt if you say yes here. We also have payment receipt, Visa signature waiver, maximum total. There's also MasterCard, Discover, and American Express. So what this does is if you enable this and put in an amount, anything below the $25 that I entered in here will not require for signature. So there's no signature required when it's below $25. But after $25, it's going to ask for signature. So as you can see on the left image here, the total amount is for $12.53. There is no tip line here because it did not exceed the $25 mark. On the right, I did place an order above $25 and the signature is on the right side here. Now, because I did enable the front facing tip suggestion enabled, I actually removed the option to print out on the receipt. So to re-enable that, I do need to go back to integrated payments option and come back here and then disable the front-facing tip suggestion and entry. Now, if I go back and minimize this and open up format options, you'll see that I have print suggested tip on payment receipt on dine-in, bar, takeout, drive-through, delivery, and retail. So now the tip suggestion will show up on the screen. All right, as you can see on the bottom of the receipt, there is the tip suggestion there after enabling it on the cloud. And the last one is the print options. So if you needed to print 2 copies of the payment receipt, you want to go ahead and say yes here. And you also have enable payment receipt auto print upon authorization for dine-in orders. If these settings are set to yes, the receipt will automatically print. If you say no here, the system will prompt you to print, text, email, or bypass the receipt. Any questions?
Looks like we pretty much covered the answers in the questions in the chat here. Okay. So that looks like that is it for today. We do thank you for joining, and we will see you on the next one.